Hello, Janginis. Before we get started, Rich and I want to let you in on some even more exciting updates for our Patreon subscribers.
As you know, Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast. All patrons get early access to new CutOff Jeans episodes before they're released to the public.
But the most exciting new perk is that all of our patrons will be able to listen to an exclusive bonus episode of the podcast every other week. Topics include personal stories that I'm not ready to share publicly, conversations with family and friends.
And sometimes we'll devote an entire episode to other subjects we love, like musical theater or classic television.
Rich and I enjoy bringing you the CutOff Jeans podcast, and it would mean so much if you would consider supporting our labor of love.
Just go to patreon.com/cutoffjeanspodcast.
Thank you so much, my Janginis.
And now, on with the show. Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip, hip, hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Jeans.
Welcome to CutOff Jeans, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. I'm a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Richard Castle, the co-host and producer of this lovely podcast. What's going on, Julie?
I'm just sitting here watching my dog be harassed by children walking past. It happens.
Your poor dog.
You know what? People love her. And she is truly the mayor of this neighborhood. Everybody knows her name.
Yeah.
She controls everybody. But yeah, sometimes kids are a little over the top.
My dog is the opposite. He'll harass anybody walking by.
Yes, indeed. They have very different personalities.
We had a plumber come to work on the house, and we had to put Buddy away the entire time that the worker was there. Buddy just sat at the door, like just fuming. And when
so mad that somebody was in his space.
Oh my God! How dare they? How dare they? Like we are literally just guests in his home, as far as he's concerned.
Oh sure, yeah. You know, Brooklyn is like that with the cats now. The only beings she does not care about is our cats.
Wow.
It's so funny because when we first got them as kittens, she was obsessed with them because we kept them separate from her because we were scared she was going to eat them. And, you know, finally now they have the run of the house. She cannot be bothered with them at all. She literally won't even look at them. She like averts her eyes, and they will do anything to get her attention. Like they will do parkour off her while she's walking.
That is a riot. Oh my God.
And she is not having any of it. So there you go. I'm going to do a little update. Do you remember the story about the couple? The remains of a young couple were found, I guess, in the early 80s in Texas somewhere, and they used a genetic genealogist to figure out who they were much later when genetic genealogy became a thing. And they found their families, and they asked, where is our daughter? Well, where is their daughter? Where's Holly? And so there was this whole other thing about, they had a baby and nobody knows where she is because they had just disappeared.
Oh.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this. And they were apparently part of some cult.
Yes. Okay. The cult thing I remember. Yeah.
Yes, the cult thing. So there was a story. They finally did a story on it on 2020 the other night and told the whole story and went into it a little further about the reunion between Holly and her biological family. And she's since written a book about it. So
was she kidnapped? I mean, was that what happened?
The people that adopted her were a pastor. These two barefoot women came to his church and basically gave her to them and said, find a home for her. Their parents don't want them.
Okay. But the parents had been killed.
Supposedly, we don't know about the timeline. They don't know exactly when the parents had been killed. So who knows? Anyway, they did that. And the pastor was like, hey, we need another kid. So the pastor adopted her.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, it's crazy. And initially, I think when I told this story, I was like, that all sounds very fishy to me. But it actually seems on the up and up.
Yeah.
that it just was, it was I guess a legal adoption. It had to have been, although nobody knew where the baby came from.
See, this is how Barney and Betty Rubble got Bam Bam.
Because they slept in separate beds?
No, well, that's part of it too. But I mean, Bam Bam is not their natural born child. If you remember the series.
Oh my gosh. There is adoption in everything. I'd completely forgotten about that.
The Flintstones had Pebbles, right? They gave birth to Pebbles. And Barney and...
That's right. Betty was never pregnant.
Betty was barren. She was barren Betty. And she...
Barren Betty?
Barren and bitter. And then they wished upon a star and they found this baby like on their doorstep.
Oh my gosh.
And, I never put it together because, of course, when you're a kid and you watch that stuff, you don't even think about it. Well, I didn't because I wasn't adopted. But now when I look back on it, this sounds like the story you're telling right now. Like, oh, this pastor just happened to find this baby. This women walked in with the baby and they said, hey, we want a baby.
Where did Bam Bam come from?
We never found out. Never.
They just all of a sudden were like, hey, we have a baby now.
Yeah, and he is like superhuman strong.
Bam Bam.
That's why they gave him the name Bam Bam, because he could like take a piece of furniture and bam it,
Okay, so yes, that's right. Oh my gosh, you remember things better than me.
I have two things that I've learned from the story. Well, three now that I've learned from what you've told me so far. One, which I did not even think about, was that Bam Bam is adopted in the Flintstones. So that,
yes.
I knew that, but I didn't really process it. The second thing I've learned is that don't join a cult. People, don't join a cult. Have a little common sense.
Yeah, this cult was supposedly that you had to denounce all your worldly possessions, including your children.
Oh my God.
But they're a Jesus cult.
Yeah.
So
I don't care what cult it is. There's no good cult. The third thing I learned is that
more.
Yeah, is that 2020 is still on.
Yes, it's on.
I haven't watched it since like Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs.
Okay, I watch it every single week.
Oh my gosh.
In fact, I record 2020 48 hours and Dateline every week.
Oh my God. I had no idea.
I love that stuff. I love that stuff.
No, I used to watch them too, but go ahead.
There you go. Yeah, I love them. And I like to record them so that I can fast forward, because they go through, after they come back from every commercial break, they repeat the story again before they move on. It drives me nuts. I'm like, do I have that short of an attention span? So just finishing off, Holly wrote a book called Finding Baby Holly, and it's out now. So she's been doing the rounds. And now I want to go back to the Flintstones and segue to another Betty Rubble, Rosie O'Donnell.
Oh, that's pretty good.
There's a segue I never thought I would do.
Because Rosie O'Donnell played Betty Rubble in the Flintstones movie. Yes.
Exactly. All right. So Rosie O'Donnell, as you know, has adopted 5 children of her own.
Yes.
And she has a podcast now called Onward. Now, let me give you some background on this. I guess like last November or December, Rosie came into adoptee TikTok, and there was a hullabaloo. In adoptees, like she listened to what one adoptee was saying, and she said, I'm listening, which is a boon for whenever any celebrity will listen to adoptees, because nobody elevates our voices or what we're saying.
I see.
It's a good thing. And she made a video saying, I'm so sorry you had a bad experience. I really am. Now, that triggered many adoptees because, and I'm not necessarily saying what she did was wrong or what they did was wrong. The way they responded to her was not great. The fact is, adoptees are triggered when somebody says, I'm sorry you had a bad experience, but this person over here had a good experience. That's being talked over. But also, it's not about our experience. It's about what happened to us. It's not about the type of family we were adopted into. It was about the trauma, the pre-verbal trauma that we had. that still affects us to this day. And that is what we are trying to get across to people, that it's not about our families, our adoptive families, most of the time. It's about how the way adoption is done is not good for your mental health. So Rosie came in, and then people gave unhinged responses to her, which is never a good idea, because then her people came back and all they want to do is support their Rosie. And so they will re-injure all these triggered adoptees with the same kind of, you should be grateful, blah, blah, blah comments. So it was a whole thing. And I stay away from drama, but I did make a TikTok video saying, look, Rosie O'Donnell has come into our space. Let's give her a chance, and let's not jump to conclusions, and see if she will listen and maybe be an advocate for us for what we're having to say. It's not smart to immediately alienate someone who has expressed an interest in hearing us.
Yeah, whether they're a celebrity or not.
Yes, but in my mind, I want it to be, we need a celebrity to advocate for us, because nobody has heard. We are still hearing, I've never heard that before.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
So unless it's on a national level, things are not going to change.
Right.
So that was what that was about. Anyway, Rosie came in. Rosie saw that video and messaged me. Long story short, we ended up FaceTiming. We talked for a bit. I explained to her what was going on. We had some interesting conversations. At one point, we were going to actually do each other's podcast. I don't know what happened, but it ended up not happening, which is fine. At first, I told her, because she asked to do our podcast, and I told her, let me think about it, because I was very much afraid of the ramifications and the repercussions I would get from adoptee TikTok, which is not a good thing at all. And in hindsight, who cares about adoptee TikTok? I mean, yes, I care about adoptee TikTok, but there's a lot of drama there, and it's not a healthy or safe space for anybody.
Right.
Anyway. So, end of that story. Rosie, we talked a few times. She was very nice. And recently, on a recent episode of her podcast, Onward, she had another adoptee on as a guest, and she had read her book, apparently. And her name is Angela Tucker. I first knew of Angela from a documentary that she made about finding her biological family. Angela is a transracial adoptee. So she is Black. Her adoptive parents are white.
Okay.
And which is a whole other area that I can't speak of, because I am a white person.
Who was adopted by a white family. Yes.
Who was adopted by a white family, right.
Yeah.
So that was what I knew Angela from. She's also recently written a book called Why Aren't You Grateful, which is a great name for a book about adoption. And Rosie had the, I think, good sense to invite Angela onto her podcast so they can talk about it. I'm sure she talked to her ahead of time. And I don't know, maybe I was a little too radical for Rosie. I don't know. There were a couple of things that we kind of had sticking points on about adoption reform. And I personally never really got her to hear that adoptees' voices need to be the most important voices in the conversation. Like, not only do they need to be elevated to the level of adoptive parents, they need to be elevated beyond the level of adoptive parents. And she couldn't take that. So whatever. So Angela was on, and it was actually a really good conversation. Rosie did pretty well. She did say one really cringy thing that a lot of people took note of. And Angela was very, what's the word?
Diplomatic?
Diplomatic, thank you. Angela's very diplomatic in her response to this. I would not have been so diplomatic. And I think maybe
That's why you weren't on the show.
Maybe Rosie knew that about me. So I'm going to quote you what she said to him. It said to her, she was talking about one day when her son Parker was 7. They were having a conversation, and all of a sudden he said to her, "Why didn't my birth mother want me?" And she was taken aback by that question and was very off the cuff, which she admits. And here's what she said. "Well, Parker, I can tell you this. Your birth mother wasn't ready to be a mommy, and God looked inside the tummy and realized that there was a mix-up. And she listened to God because she was a good person, and God found you me because I'm your match." Mm-hmm. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, I understand why the impetus to say something very comforting like that to a child, to your child, right, who you are raising.
Yes.
And so it's like telling a child a fairy tale, or telling them that there's a Santa Claus or an Easter Bunny, or and so I look at it that way. But I am not part of the triad either, and so I don't have those kind of walls up. I don't get triggered by it. I understand why you would be, but I also understand why someone. I don't know how old the child was, but I'm assuming
he was 7.
Yeah, by the way she's talking to him, and the child knows that he is adopted, that she's not really keeping a secret from him. She's trying to help him to understand.
Yes, and I appreciate that. What I actually was surprised that she invoked God in all of this, and also that God realized that there was a mix-up.
Yeah,
to me
not
sounds
the best
like
words,
it's not. And she herself admitted that she maybe didn't hit it out of the park that day. So I'll give her that. But it gives me the ick.
Yeah.
I don't know if Rosie is religious. And I guess she has a belief in God, because there are plenty of gay Christians, despite what the current face of Christianity tells you. Yeah. I just feel like softening a hard truth by invoking God is cruel and disingenuous, because it feeds into the savior thing that a lot of adoptive parents have. That whole, which is what we as adoptees have to deal with. You're so lucky. Why aren't you grateful? These people saved you from a certain death, what have you. And I know a lot of people find extreme comfort in their religion, and I'm not, or their faith, and but for me, it feels like indoctrination to use God as a part of why you were adopted. And basically saying, "Oh, there was a mix-up." This God is supposed to be perfect, according to you. So why did God make that mistake? I don't know.
I mean, I think the idea of a mix-up is probably problematic. I don't think that I have such a problem with someone saying, "I think God brought us together." I mean, I think a lot of people believe that in their own relationships with their wives and husbands, and
Sure, yes, if they're very religious, sure.
Or that they have this feeling of deep love and spiritual connection with somebody else, that they kind of attribute it to a higher power. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
I mean, my mother used to say, "I thank God that I had 3 boys. I prayed she prayed when she went to see some movie when she was a kid. She saw some movie with Jane Wyman about that she had 3 sons. And my mother came out of that movie theater and prayed that she would have 3 sons. And so she really, truly believed that that's why.
Oh my God. That God listened to her prayer about 3 sons. Like God didn't have more important things to do.
Either God or Jane Wyman.
Right. We should all pray to Jane Wyman.
I'm making light of it, but what I mean is that I think it comes from the same place. But a mix-up is a little problematic. A
mix-up is problematic. I don't know. Well, for me personally, as an atheist, basically, I have trouble with anything that says that somebody else has control over that and put you,
but if somebody isn't an atheist, and I also cut somebody slack when a 7-year-old comes out with a question that you're not necessarily prepared to answer either.
Sure, but that's that right there. Now there's a good reason for parents, for potential adoptive parents, to be trauma informed.
I agree with that 100%.
Right there. That she should have had that question ready to answer.
Yeah. Yeah. But they haven't, I'm just going to be devil's advocate. Haven't your children ever asked you a question that you were completely unprepared for, like at the time when they asked it? And I don't mean anything about adoption. I just mean about life.
I don't think so.
Really? Okay. Well, then you're a great mom.
You know what? I was very prepared to answer uncomfortable questions from my kids, but it was weird. It was almost like, what? Don't you want to know this? You know, what's funny is like when I was teaching Lily about the birds and the bees, she was very reticent. She's like, I don't want to hear it. I'm like, okay, well then when you have questions though, come and ask me directly. And so occasionally she would. And she'd be like, okay, what does this mean? I'm like, this means this and this and this. And then she'd be like, okay. And I'm like, got anything else? And she's like, not right now. And walk away and just like ponder it.
My mom gave me a set of books called The Life Cycle Library.
Oh, okay.
She gave it to me and said, don't ask.
Don't ask.
Because Jews don't talk about this stuff with their moms.
Oh, God, that's so funny. That is so funny. Yeah, my mom, I had the conversation, very uncomfortable conversation with the way my mother told me. But it was all very much like, I mean, she described it. This is what happens. This is like the physicality of it, which I think is good. But it was very clear that the people doing that were married.
Sure. Did you, as an adoptee, did you ever ask your mom a question like what this 7-year-old asked Rosie? Like, why didn't my mom want me or something like that? I mean, do you remember?
Yeah. I don't remember specifically asking, but I remember the story was always that she was unmarried and couldn't afford to keep me. Yeah. I think that was, I'm not about the afford. It could have been just couldn't keep me because she was unmarried.
Right.
Which, of course, is
partially in the truth, right?
Well, she was unmarried until 2 months after she gave me up.
Right.
So.
Right. But she didn't marry the man who had
no, she
fathered
didn't.
you.
But that's why I was in the baby's home for 2 months, because they knew she was going to get married, and so they decided just to leave me in limbo until they didn't hear from her. Yeah. So,
and apparently she never met your birth father anyway. So
not as far as she's concerned.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so should we take a break?
Let's do that. If you're enjoying our podcast, please subscribe, rate, and review. Or consider supporting us on our Patreon page, patreon.com/CutOff Jeans Podcast. Now back to Julie and me.
Okay, I have something out of the news.
Okay.
Here it is. A North Texas father-daughter duo used a popular DNA testing kit to unlock a medical mystery. They learned he was switched at birth more than 70 years ago. He didn't know until he was 70 that he was switched at birth. And he credits his daughter, his name is Andy Perkins, credits his daughter, Candy Summers, for rooting out a medical mix-up that changed the course of his life. She'd given him an ancestry DNA testing kit for his 70th birthday as part of her years-long project to map out the Perkins family tree. When her father's results came in, there was not a single reference to any other Perkins, not even his own parents. As she continued digging for answers into her father's roots, the last name Robinson started appearing. She'd finally gathered enough evidence, including DNA test results from various family members, to conclude that her father wasn't biologically related to anyone with the last name of Perkins, not even the couple who raised him.
Wow.
In search of answers, Candy referred back to a copy of her father's birth announcement from 1950, printed in a local newspaper. 2 babies were born 1 day apart in that small New York hospital. These 2 babies were named Andy Perkins and Philip Robinson.
Oh, my God. Wow.
At that moment, it really snapped for me, because all of a sudden I was like, he was accidentally switched to birth in the hospital. That was the light bulb, said Summers. I absolutely knew I needed to tell my dad. Perkins said he didn't believe his daughter at first. However, she'd researched his biological mother and was about to find a picture of her to show to her father. I cried the instant I saw the picture. I knew she was my mother, said Perkins. I had her hair in her profile. She was my mom. It was really special. It still gets me. It was one of the most special moments in my life, he said. Perkins says he'd always felt there was something different about him growing up. I never felt like I belonged. I used to joke with people and show them a picture of my family and say, who doesn't look like the other, said Perkins. He has light blue eyes and light-colored hair compared to the rest of his family, whose features include brown eyes and dark hair. She also said his interests and characteristics were different from that of his siblings. I have been in therapy many times over my identity, and as I look back, I had the same identity problems that many adopted children have, except I knew I wasn't adopted, he added. Both he and Summers believe it was a pure accident, but the revelation meant they had an entirely different family who had no clue of their existence. That was about to change.
And he was 70, right?
He was 70. Yeah.
Oh.
Ready to meet their new family, Summers made and shared a video with some of the Robinsons whom she had contacted during her detective work. Word quickly got to Andy Perkins' biological sister, Sally Holly, in Colorado. It was absolutely shocking to me, said Holly, after receiving the news. She says her brother Philip, the other baby born at the same time as Perkins, had died of cancer when he was just 6 years old.
Oh, my God, that's tragic.
Perkins' biological parents had also passed away a few years back. Holly was the first blood relative to meet her long-lost brother. It was the most bizarre, crazy, exciting thing to see this brother who reminded me of my mother, reminded me of my father, was about the same size as one of my brothers. It was just a wild feeling and emotional, said Holly. Perkins has now met all of his siblings. In fact, the Perkins and Robinsons have begun annual family reunions. Perhaps the other most challenging part of the revelation was sharing the news with Shirley Perkins, the mother who raised him. She's still alive.
Oh, my God.
We told her everything that was going on, showed her pictures. She dabbed her eyes a few times and said, well, isn't God good? That was her reaction, said Perkins. I mean, what else could it be? I don't know. I feel like maybe she shouldn't have known.
At that point, I don't know if I would have told her, but
I don't know.
I know we're all about truth. But
I know.
She had to have been in her 90s, right? I mean,
it had to have been.
Yeah. And the other part is like to know that her natural born son died at 6. I mean, it's
tragic, really, isn't it?
Yes.
I have 2 huge, wonderful families. I'm so blessed, said Perkins. Historians say incidents of babies being switched at birth were likely more common than most think, but it's impossible to know how often it happened. It reminds me of that story from the 80s about the 2 girls were switched at birth in a hospital. I think it was in Texas. And it was this media circus. The one girl had died also young. And somehow, I can't remember, the parents found out that she wasn't their daughter through a blood test or something. I don't know. Like after she died, I can't remember. But then they wanted to get to the bottom of where their actual daughter was. And then it became this weird custody thing. And the mother of the other girl that was still alive, that was their biological daughter, had passed away. And the father had remarried, and there was so much about it on TV. Like they had these trials and these court cases, and this girl was put up there, and she would say things like how wonderful her father was, and she didn't want to be taken from him, and blah blah blah. And then she would change her mind so often. And then she went to live with the biological family for a while, and it was wonderful. And they showed footage of her loving them. So every time they would do an interview with her, she'd completely turned around. She must have been so confused. And now, so it was, gosh, they've done, she's like an adult now, and she's been through so much. But she basically remembers just being a puppet for all of these people. And it's just, I can't remember her name. I'll put it in the show notes or something. But it just reminded me of the whole switched at birth thing, and then one of them dies and somebody else tries to claim. I don't know.
I mean, I guess for the daughter of the 70-year-old man who had done the DNA test and discovered that he, was not who he thought he was, what luck that she would find out that there were only 2 babies born in this little town. I mean,
that was a really good find,
right? Because
her part.
If most places babies, I would assume a lot of babies are born in one day, and
well, at larger hospitals, but if it's a tiny hospital, it's much easier to research.
And then you think, like, how far, if it was a tiny hospital that both of these moms gave birth in a day apart, they couldn't have lived that far from each other either.
Right, but they ended up in Texas.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? It's just it's one of those crazy things. But I'm happy for him that seems to be welcoming and welcomed into this other family.
And of course, we always hear these wonderful stories right after they've happened, where everybody is like in the honeymoon phase. Things always turn to some, and I mean, and they don't necessarily not always for the worst, or there's not always like a estrangement or anything like that, but it's always a roller coaster.
Oh, sure. And even for this 70-year-old guy who's gone through his whole life, he has to reevaluate all of that, with this new information. So
yeah.
It does. I just recently rewatched that episode of Dick Van Dyke where where their son Richie is born, and he swears that the hospital gave him the wrong baby. Do you remember this episode?
I saw something.
So funny.
I don't know if you told me about that, or I feel like you have to have.
Yeah, it's famous, but basically for the people who haven't watched, or our listeners who have not watched it, Dick Van Dyke Show, great show. He and Mary Tyler Moore play a married couple, and they have a baby.
He slept in
Richie.
separate beds.
Yes,
we have no idea how she got pregnant.
Right, exactly. We're not supposed to question it. But like they show him at the hospital, and the nurse gives him like the wrong toys, and the wrong flowers are delivered to her room, and all these different things happen where there are mix-ups, right?
Yeah.
And so he gets the baby home, and he starts to think, "Oh my God, this isn't our baby. We need to switch it with the people who gave birth in the next room or whatever."
Yeah.
And so he calls up the father of the other baby that was born and says, we have to talk about this. And so it's a reveal that when the doorbell rings and the couple walks in, it's an African-American couple.
Yes, you have told me this. Yes.
And
okay.
It's so fun.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Shall we take a break?
I think we shall. Thank you for listening to Cut Off Jeans with Julie Dixon Jackson and Richard Castle. You can support us by going to patreon.com/Cutoff Jeans podcast. Now, back to the program.
All right. We are going to continue walking in the footsteps of my ancestors.
There's a lot of footsteps, Julie.
So many footsteps. I averaged like 10,000 steps a day, by the way, while I was on this thing.
10,000? That's good.
10,000. Yeah. I'm just saying. Nothing like that now.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see. We left off. We were at Chester. We went to the St. John the Baptist ruins, which was amazing. And then I said we went back to our hotel, and there was a crow, which was always symbolic for us. I forgot to mention that we went to the amphitheater, the Chester Amphitheater, which is a Roman amphitheater right next to the church. It's an actual Roman amphitheater.
Very cool.
If you recall, one of the things I wanted to do was go to Leicester to look at Bosworth Field and also find the car park where Richard III had been exhumed.
Yes.
If you recall that. And we were going to do that on the way to Oxford, where I was going to be leaving my brother, because that's where his friends were staying and the people who lived, and the people that we'd borrowed the car from. But he was talking about Bath a lot, and he'd been there last time. He was there with his family like 4 years ago, and he'd been there briefly and really liked it and wanted to share it with me. I was there in the late 80s. Don't remember a bloody thing about it because I was young and stupid. Anyway,
on a side note, the late 80s was probably the last time I took a bath.
Ha ha! Thank you.
It's true. I prefer a shower.
Seriously?
Yes.
Oh my God.
I always feel like in a bath, I'm just sitting in my own filth.
Yeah, no. Yeah. I live for baths.
Do you?
Yes, I do.
I'm sorry, but we digress.
So we decided to forego Lester, because it wasn't that I mean, he's my brother is hardly a British history Anglophile like I am.
Yes.
And I can do that at any time. So Bath happens to be right next to or pretty close to Bristol, which is where I was planning on going after I left Rob in Oxford. But I said, hey, we can go to Bath if you will come with me to look at properties in Bristol that happen to be on my mother's side of the family. So of no significance to him.
Right.
But he was like, absolutely.
Right.
So we decided to book a couple nights in Bath, but we were going to stop in Bristol first and then do the real So Bath was the real touristy time for us, where we just literally did the tourist thing, which was great. But anyway, I'm going to tell you about Bristol. Now, I've talked about this before. What is interesting about Bristol to me is this house called Towerhurst, and it was owned and lived in by the Clark family, specifically my second great aunt, Emma Jane Ball, or Clark Nee Ball. She was the sister of my paternal second great grandfather, William Henry Ball. The Balls were from Cornwall, and while two of the brothers went to Australia to try their luck in the gold rush, the sisters remained in England. They made marriages of varying value, with the most successful being Emma, who married a Robert Clark, who was a wealthy clothing importer in 1853 in Truro. So they then here's a snippet from stuff about the house. In 1861, Yorkshire-born architect John Henry Hurst invited builders to tender for the construction of two houses near the seawall, Durham Down, Bristol. Each house was to have a lodge, which it still does. The first of the houses, called Avonhurst, became the home of Hurst and his family until shortly after he died in 1882. There are reports that the second, called Towerhurst, which is my family's house, was built for a wealthy merchant who used to climb up to the tower to watch his ships coming in and out of Bristol along the gorge. If true, the tower in question would probably have been the castellated one, as it is believed that the round tower, along with a vaguely Tudor-looking appendage beneath it, was added some years after the house was first built. So this house had been in the Clark family, Emma Jane and her husband and their children, from about the early 1880s, I think, until right up. Now, he died in 1881. So she was a widow for the rest of that time until she died in 1911. But they had 6 children, I think, 5 daughters and 1 son, who all lived in that house. And it became even when their mother died, it was that was their home, their, homestead.
Okay.
I found numerous newspaper articles talking about weddings that came from there and going to a nearby church. That talked about the funeral of Mr. Clark himself. It described it's very descriptive. And the kids lived there. They all lived in this house, or until they were married. The ones that got married moved out, but stayed very close. But they also had separate houses in London because they were rich. And but there 2 of the daughters that died spinsters stayed at the house. The last one dying in 1944, I believe. And because there were there had been one grandchild from one of the daughters who had died during the First World War, and he was the only child of all of those children. So they had nobody to pass the house on to, or the property on to, which is amazing. So she died. The house went into a trust, and then it has been various things since. It was bought by other families. At one point, it was turned into apartments, and now again, it's a private home.
And you were able to see it?
Yes, I've seen pictures of it online. It's a magnificent house, and it does overlook the Avon Gorge. It's right off of this huge park in Stoke Bishop, and so my brother came with me. So now I'd posted about it in the Facebook group beforehand, telling him I was finally going to get to see this because I'd already booked my accommodations there. And I was like, I would love to know who lives here now, but I don't know how to do that. I need to thank listener Steve Marr, who is a British listener, and he did a little research for me, and he sent me a link for the Bristol planning applications with attached documents. Because it's a historic home, mm-hmm. Any change that you make into the house, you have to go through rigorous documentation and get permission. And they did several things on the property, and he was able to go in and find out what had been done and who had asked for it. And the family who lives there is the family of Mr. Keen Seeger, who is a banker, a mortgage banker, I think, in the Bristol area. And he raised his family in the house. He and his wife still live there. And I found out I don't have the same ability to find people in England as I do here, because they don't have been verified and stuff like that, mm-hmm. that I can utilize in the U.S. But I did find him just by Googling him, and I sent an email to his company address. And I don't know whether it was read or not, but I never heard from him. And I did a very this is going to be a really weird thing, but this was in my family, and I know it's your private family house, and I wonder if you might consider letting me see it, and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Never heard back from him, and so I was like, I don't know. I felt weird about going further. In hindsight, I should have written a letter to the family directly to the property.
Yeah, I mean, it's always, especially today where everybody's so leery of scams and stuff like that, and giving out personal information, let alone letting a stranger.
Oh, of course. So, but even in the email, I was like, "This is who I am. This is my website." Blah blah blah. You know, never heard from him. Don't know if he even saw it. He probably didn't. That address probably doesn't even go directly to him. It probably goes to an assistant or something, if it even went to his email.
But you were able to see the house from the outside when you were there.
We got there. We pulled up, and I went to the gate. It's got Towerhurst written on the gate. And there is a lodge in the front of the house that is like a separate house. And apparently that's where the help used to live. And as we were looking at it, there was also like a call box in the front. And I could see right into the property. And I pushed the button just to see, but I didn't know how to make it go through. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the lady came out from the property, from the lodge. And so we started talking to her. She was lovely. She was a Dutch lady, and she'd lived there for many years, and she knew them. And I told her the story and blah, blah, blah. And she said, I don't think they're home, but I'm sure they would have let you in.
Well, that's sweet.
And in fact, she actually called them while we were standing there.
Oh my God.
And left a message for them. And she's like, yeah, they're not home. But she left a message and told them, just to see if they were around, but they were out of town. But I actually have still never heard from them, but I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know.
You tried.
I would still love to. I tried. I would love to have gotten in there. But I got to go all around it. You can see the entire property on the outside from the park next door.
Right.
And I think, if not, I will put the TikTok videos up there of the day that I was there, or that we were there, that Rob and I were there. It was amazing. And then we also went to look for a couple of other properties that some of the daughters had lived in nearby. Didn't spend as much time there as I originally wanted to, because my brother was with me, and
Sure.
But then we went to the church that the family attended, and there is the gate that goes into the churchyard. It's like a little shelter area going into a property that's like a little hut almost. And there are two plaques in there, and it was built by two of the sisters for their nephews, both of who had died in the First World War. Mm. And one of them being my second cousin, 3 times removed. Anyway, so there was that. I also found all of their graves. They're all buried in a close by, very prominent area, because they basically were patrons of the church, I guess. Like they were, they were they had all their weddings there, and they were obviously prominent members of the community. And at the last, I was looking at the sign outside that tells you who the pastor is and all that, and her name was Ball. Oh. And so I, of course, usually the pastors live like right next to, if not right next to the property. And so the parsonage was right next to it. So I went and knocked on the door. And I said, "Is your name Paul?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "I'm so sorry, but I'm visiting the area because of my Ball family. And I just thought it was an interesting coincidence that you're the pastor of this church and your name is Ball." And anyway, but she was like, "That's my husband's name." And I don't think that's anyway.
And it's not like the most uncommon name either. Like,
exactly. Like Lucille.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's a lot of balls in the air.
By the way, I'm not related to Lucille Ball.
Okay. All right.
I have looked that up. But anyway. So from there we went to Bath, and Bath, if you don't know, Bath is named Bath because of the Roman baths there.
Yes.
Yes. And it was quite spectacular. Beautiful, beautiful city.
I remember there's a Jane Austen book that takes place in Bath.
And you know what? In hindsight, I didn't have that much time there, and I don't think it would have interested Rob very much. But there's a whole Jane Austen exhibit in Bath, too.
Cool.
That I didn't get to. But
yeah, well, next time. You can't do everything, right?
You can't.
I
and
know.
That's why I'm going to have to do it again. So anyway, we went to Bath, and then we went to Oxford, and so I think I can finish this up next time.
Great. Okay. Until then, I am Richard Castle, and you can visit my website, richardcastle.com. Here's the news. I haven't put it on the website yet, but my next musical reality trip will be produced next fall at Northern Sky Theater in Wisconsin, and it's been officially announced, and I'm super excited about it. What else? Oh, you can follow me on the Twitter, X, whatever. Oh, Instagram, @CastleSongs.
And his address is, just kidding.
My social security number is.
And here's his phone number. Okay. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson. As you all know, you can find all things Julie Dixon Jackson at cutoffjeans.com. Join the Facebook group. Follow me on TikTok. If you would like help, reach out to me. I'm taking a few. I've decided I'm going to take on some pro bono cases.
Nice.
Because I get joy from helping people.
You do.
So yes, I do. And so if you still have some questions or would like me to look at your DNA, reach out to me. I would love to help you.
And what will you tell them when they reach out to you, Julie?
As always, the truth is in your genes.